I thought that I stood in a large and beautiful meadow, which lay a short distance from the house in which we lived, and that everything around me wore an aspect of peculiar pleasantness. The first thing that attracted my special attention in this magnificent meadow was a very pure and clear stream of water, which ran through the midst of it. And as I traced this stream, I discovered 2 trees standing upon its margin, both of which were on the same side of the stream. These trees were very beautiful. They were well proportioned and towered with majestic beauty to a great height. Their branches, which added to their symmetry and glory, commenced near the top and spread themselves in luxurious grandeur around. I gazed upon them with wonder and admiration, and after beholding them a short time, I saw one of them was surrounded with a bright belt that shone like burnished gold, but far more brilliantly. Presently, a gentle breeze passed by, and the tree encircled with this golden zone bent gracefully before the wind, and waved its beautiful branches in the light air. As the wind increased, the tree assumed the most lively and animated appearance, and seemed to express in its motions the utmost joy and happiness. If it had been an intelligent creature, could not be conveyed by the power of language the idea of joy and gratitude so perfectly as it did, and even the stream that rolled beneath it shared apparently every sensation felt by the tree, for as the branches danced over the stream, it would gently swell and then recede again, with a motion as soft as the breathing of an infant, but as lively as the dancing of a sunbeam. The belt also partook of the same influence, and as it moved in unison with the motion of the stream and of the tree, it increased continually in refulgence and magnitude until it became exceedingly glorious. I turned my eyes upon its fellow, which stood opposite, but it was not surrounded with the belt of light as the former, and it stood erect and fixed as a pillar of marble. No matter how strong the wind blew over it, not a leaf was stirred, not a bough was bent, but obstinately stiff it stood, scorning alike the zephyr's breath or the power of the mighty storm. I wondered at what I saw, and said in my heart, "What can be the meaning of all of this?" And the interpretation given me was that these personated my husband and his oldest brother, Jesse Smith, that the stubborn and unyielding tree was like Jesse, that the other, more pliant and flexible, was like Joseph, my husband, that the breath of heaven which passed over them was the pure and undefiled gospel of the Son of God, which gospel Jesse would always resist, but which Joseph, when he was more advanced in life, would hear and receive with his whole heart, and rejoice therein, and unto him would be added intelligence, happiness, glory, and everlasting life. The Dream of Lucy Mack Smith.
I am Ryan McKnight.
I'm Cara Santa Maria.
I am Christopher Smith.
Hi, I'm Andrew Torres.
This is Naked Mormonism,
the serial Mormon history podcast. I love you, Mom. Sometimes we don't say these words enough to the people to whom they matter the most. Mormon congregations everywhere will be celebrating Mother's Day this weekend. What is it we're celebrating when we thank our mothers on this day? I got a Facebook message in from Sean, who's giving a talk and sacrament meeting this weekend about mothers, and the resulting conversation made me think about the mothers of Mormonism. They weren't just broodmares with massive families. They were caretakers and drivers of society in so many respects. Today, we're going to hear the stories of some of the most prominent mothers in Zion: Lucy Mack Smith, Elizabeth Ann Whitney, and a number of other prominent figures who seemed to capture everything it was to be a true mother of Zion. They were caretakers. They were loving and loved. They accomplished incredible feats when all the odds were against them. What lessons can we take from their incredible stories? Gender roles in the church and its history are clearly rooted in the culture and world from whence the religion sprang, So maybe it's worth taking a step back to appreciate the ways that everybody contributed to building the Mormon kingdom, as opposed to simplistically viewing the history of a patriarchal religion through the eyes of the men who recorded their own influence on its history and origin. Let's take this Mother's Day as an opportunity to talk about the Mothers of Zion, using mostly church-approved sources. Immediately, we run into a bit of a blind spot when it comes to studying the Mothers of Mormonism. Mormon history has largely been recorded by men in leadership positions who had little reason to include the role of women in their lives who impacted the history in less direct ways. Much of our examination today will be surrounding the women whose role was often that of supporting the men in the early church. This isn't a weakness of the examination, but rather a weakness in how the history itself was initially recorded. The roles of women and mothers within the church seem dictated by society at large, which had their respective roles structured to support the men by whom these women were surrounded. It's tough to examine Mormonism apart from the founding father, Joseph Smith. Today we're going to examine the support structure various mothers provided the founding prophet in order to enable him to create Mormonism. You'll only see the actors on the stage, but the stage crew, the producers, writers, musicians, lighting crew, sound engineers, those are the people who make the actors shine. Let's talk about the people who truly kept Mormonism running on the back end, the people behind the curtain. Those who never get the awards, they never get their own revelations, and so often have their role simply reduced to the husbands they married or the children they bore. And we mustn't lose sight of the importance of mother's role in any historical narrative. So let's start at the beginning. If not for Mother Lucy Mack Smith, the Smith family physically and spiritually never would have survived, much less be in a place to allow Mormonism to evolve out of the world in which the Smith family lived. From a very young age, Lucy Mack was brought up in a family with a father, Solomon Mack, who was constantly occupied in providing for the Mack family. A Revolutionary War veteran and a member of the various militia forces fighting off the natives throughout the earliest foundational decades prior to the Declaration of Independence. Lydia Gates and Solomon Mack met sometime in 1759, and they were married shortly after. Lydia Gates Mack bore Lucy Mack on July 8, 1775, possibly 76. The history is a little ambiguous here. Lydia provided the necessary education to her sons and daughters in the fields of farming, homemaking, and religion. When Lucy Mack was a mere 8 years old, her mother fell deathly ill. This is from the History of Joseph Smith the Prophet by his mother, beginning on page 36. Quote, "When I arrived at the age of 8 years, my mother had a severe fit of sickness. She was so low that she, as well as her friends, entirely despaired of her recovery. During this sickness, she called her children around her bed, and, after exhorting them always to remember the instructions which she had given them, to fear God and walk uprightly before him, she gave me to my brother Stephen, requesting him to take care of me and bring me up as his own child, and then bade us each farewell." End quote. It was luckily a false alarm. Lucy Mack continues, quote, "This my brother promised to do, but as my mother shortly recovered, it was not necessary, and I consequently remained at my father's house until my sister Lovisa was married." End quote. In her religious upbringing, it seems Mother Lucy was taught to revere and fear God, yet be beholden to no specific religion. She experienced spiritual turmoil throughout her teenage and young adult years. Finally, when toiling over the death of her sister Lavina, Lucy Mack was racked with torment concerning which of all the religions was the one true religion. She was so concerned with every religion and what they would say, hanging upon her decision to join one or the other. This eventually led to an epiphany that maybe none of them are the true Church of Christ. Her mindset was similar to many restorationists of her day. Quote, "For I was pensive and melancholy, and often in my reflections I thought that life was not worth possessing. In the midst of this anxiety of mind, I determined to obtain that which I heard spoken of so much from the pulpit, a change of heart. To accomplish this, I spent much of my time in reading the Bible and praying. But notwithstanding my great anxiety to experience a change of heart, another matter would always interpose in all my meditations. If I remain a member of no church, all religious people will say I am of the world. And if I join some one of the different denominations, all the rest will say I am in error. No church will admit that I am right, except the one with which I am associated. This makes them witness against each other. And how can I decide in such a case as this, seeing they are all unlike the Church of Christ as it existed in former days?" Soon after this, Lucy Mack met Joseph Smith Sr. "While I remained at Tunbridge, I became acquainted with a young man by the name of Joseph Smith, to whom I was subsequently married." End quote. Lucy Mack and Joseph Smith married in January of 1796, and Lucy's brother, Stephen Mack, provided the young couple a wedding gift of $1,000. This money was subsequently lost by Joseph Sr., Big Daddy Cheese, in his ginseng business deal, which went awry, leaving Lucy Mack and the rest of the Smith family to be incredibly resourceful throughout 1800 to 1830 just to make ends meet. Nothing went to waste. Every family member contributed anything they could to keep the house going, and everybody had to pull their own weight. While Joseph Sr. was off with his friends hunting buried treasure, digging wells, and getting hammer smashed drunk, Lucy Mack was left home with the 10 kids, raising them, giving them spiritual guidance, and teaching them the skills they would need to be citizens contributing to society in positive ways. Her acumen as mother was tested constantly through trial and tribulation. Sickness ravaged the Smith family. One child would fall ill, and it wasn't long before unsanitary conditions and lacking medical care left the rest of the children sick. A person only has so much energy and mental faculties to devote to any given task. Once reaching greater than, anywhere from 3 to 4 children, it becomes a system where the older children raise the younger children, and mom is so frazzled and overworked with no sleep and less than sufficient nutrition to be the best mother she could be. The Smith family relied so heavily on Mother Lucy during their best and worst of times to keep the family afloat. Seemingly against all odds, Lucy and Joseph Sr. somehow provided for the entire Smith family of 13 people at this time, when young Joseph Jr. was but a wee little lad. From Lucy Mack's biography of Joseph Smith, quote, "As our children had, in a great measure, been debarred from the privilege of schools, we began to make every arrangement to attend to this important duty. We established our second son, Hiram, in an academy at Hanover, and the rest, that were of sufficient age, we were sending to a common school that was quite convenient. Meanwhile, myself and companion were doing all that our abilities would admit for the future welfare and advantage of the family, and were greatly blessed in our labors." End quote. When the typhus fever hit the Smith family, Lucy was dragged to the absolute end of her wits in caring for the children. Quote, "But this state of things did not long continue. The typhus fever came into Lebanon and raged tremendously. Among the number seized with this complaint were first Sophronia, next Hiram, who was taken while at school and came home sick, then Alvin. In short, one after another was taken down, till all the family, with the exception of myself and husband, were prostrated upon a bed of sickness." End quote. As a mother and caretaker of 11 children, with a husband who has a very hard time holding his liquor, Lucy Mack truly was an incredible human being. Not an incredible woman, an incredible human being. No matter how hard we try, we can't even begin to imagine what this must have been like to live through for everybody in this family. Sophronia was the most ill of the children when the fever first struck the family. She was bedridden for upwards of 3 months, with Lucy caring for her, cleaning her, administering medicine, and weeping by Sophronia's bedside when the doctor condemned her to death, saying, quote, "She was so far gone, it was not for her to receive any benefit from medicine, and for this cause he discontinued his attendance upon her." End quote. When Sophronia finally clawed back from the edges of the abyss, this was the scene recounted through Lucy's eyes. Quote, "The ensuing night she lay altogether motionless, with her eyes wide open, and with that peculiar aspect which bespeaks the near approach of death. As she thus lay, I gazed upon her as a mother looks upon the last shade of life in a darling child. In this moment of distraction, my husband and myself clasped our hands, fell upon our knees by the bedside, and poured out our grief to God in prayer and supplication, beseeching him to spare our child yet a little longer. When we first arose from prayer, our child had, to all appearance, ceased breathing. I caught a blanket, threw it around her, then, taking her in my arms, commenced pacing the floor. Those present remonstrated against my doing as I did, saying, 'Mrs. Smith, It is all of no use. You are certainly crazy. Your child is dead. Notwithstanding, I would not for a moment relinquish the hope of again seeing her breathe and live. This recital, doubtless, will be uninteresting to some, but those who have experienced in life something of this kind are susceptible of feeling and can sympathize with me. Are you a mother who has been bereft of a child? Feel for your heartstrings, and then tell me how I felt with my expiring child pressed to my bosom. Would you at this trying moment feel to deny that God had power to save the uttermost all who call on him? I did not then, neither do I now. At length she sobbed. I still pressed her against my breast and continued to walk the floor. She sobbed again, then looked up into my face and commenced breathing quite freely. My soul was satisfied, but my strength was gone. I laid my daughter on the bed and sunk by her side, completely overpowered by the intensity of my feelings. From this time forward, Sophronia continued mending until she entirely recovered." End quote. When the typhus struck young Joseph, among all of Lucy's other obligations, now she was forced to carry the 8-year-old child in her arms because the infection had spread to his leg, making him unable to walk. Quote, "His legs soon began to swell, and he continued to suffer the greatest agony for the space of 2 weeks longer. During this period, I carried him much of the time in my arms in order to mitigate his suffering as much as possible, in consequence of which I was taken very ill myself. The anxiety of mind that I experienced, together with physical overexertion, was too much for my constitution, and my nature sunk underneath it." End quote. With the weight of the world, 10 sick children slowly getting better, and a worsening Joseph Jr., Lucy was understandably stressed and anxious to the point of a psychological break. A few weeks later, young Joe underwent the dreaded leg bone scraping surgery, which must have caused his mother caretaker immeasurable amounts of anguish and emotional turmoil, knowing that the leg and life of her son was completely out of her control, seated to doctors trying an experimental procedure to save the young boy's leg. Quote, "They," meaning the doctors, "being seated, I addressed them thus, 'Gentlemen, what can you do to save my boy's leg?' They answered, 'We can do nothing. We've cut it open to the bone and find it so affected that we consider his leg incurable, and that amputation is absolutely necessary in order to save his life." End quote. With so much stress already, being told by doctors that they're about to cripple your son for the rest of his life, in a day and age where the mentally or physically handicapped were relegated to vagabond status for their entire lives, this revelation must have simply crushed Lucy's spirit. But she fought back. Quote, "This was like a thunderbolt to me. I appealed to the principal surgeon, saying, 'Dr. Stone, can you not make another trial? Can you not, by cutting around the bone, take out the diseased part, and perhaps that which is sound will heal over? And by this means you will save his leg?' You will not. You must not take off his leg until you try once more. I will not consent to let you enter his room until you make me this promise." End quote. Now, Lucy's version of this story is obviously dramatized, but that says nothing to take away from the reality and horror of this situation. Lucy was understandably in a fragile state and desired nothing more than to be in control of the situation. But unfortunately, disease is no respecter of persons, and it doesn't care what you think of it. Lucy was sent out of the room, and Joseph Sr. stayed to hold his son down on the operating table. The cries of her son in agony during the leg operation were too much for Lucy to bear. Quote, "When the third piece was taken away, I burst into the room again, and, oh my God, what a spectacle for a mother's eye! The wound torn open, the blood still gushing from it, and the bed literally covered with blood. Joseph was as pale as a corpse, and large drops of sweat were rolling down his face, whilst upon every feature was depicted the utmost agony. I was immediately forced from the room and detained until the operation was completed. But when the act was accomplished, Joseph put upon a clean bed, the room cleared of every appearance of blood, and the instruments which were used in the operation removed, I was permitted again to enter." End quote. A scene like this stays with a parent forever. The screams of her son, the bed soaked in his blood, the open wound on his leg, and the powerlessness Lucy must have felt, knowing that she could do nothing to bring this suffering to an end. All this while in an already strained mental and emotional state. This scenario for young Joseph would fade from memory. The horrors of that day would stay with Lucy for the rest of her days. Lucy was a prominent mother throughout the entirety of Mormon history. She was likely in attendance at the commencement of the church. She was there during parts of the translation process. She was there when Joe brought home his new wife, Emma, after they had eloped. Lucy was a mother worth proper veneration and reverence when we consider how much she contributed and sacrificed for her family. From the simplest tasks of caretaking to the utmost extremities which pushed her mothering to the breaking point, Lucy was truly an incredible human being. When the Church of Christ experienced its first mass exodus, a revelation was delivered through Joe, commanding the Mormons to leave their possessions behind and get thee to the Ohio. The first acquaintance Joe and Emma made upon their arrival was Newell K. and Elizabeth Ann Whitney. The Whitney family was the first family the young couple, Joseph and Emma Smith, lived with when they first arrived in Kirtland, less than a year after the Book of Mormon was published and the church had been established. The Whitneys were hospitable and accommodating enough to offer a room on the top floor of their own home for the young Smith family to move into. Emma Smith at this time was about 5 months pregnant with twins, and the young couple had not a dime to their name. The Smiths quickly became attached to the Whitneys. Newell Whitney was called as a bishop after consecrating much of his property to building up the kingdom. We'll discuss that momentarily. Elizabeth Ann Whitney, however, became the primary caretaker of the prophet and his pregnant wife, and thus earned the endearing nickname of Mother Whitney. Elizabeth Ann and Newell were married in October of 1822 in Kirtland, where Newell was beginning to build his business empire. Elizabeth was truly beloved by every person who knew her, and she earned her spot as a prominent and powerful individual throughout all of Mormon history. Her spirit of hospitality and caring made her nickname of Mother Whitney extend beyond just the prophet referring to her as such. All of the Mormons knew her as Mother Whitney, especially in Utah, given her status and career there. There's a wonderful article on LDS.org about the Whitney family, written in 1978 by D. Michael Quinn, titled The Newell K. Whitney Family. You'll find a link to this article in the show notes, and I would really recommend giving it a read. D. Michael Quinn describes Mother Whitney with passing depth, but captures her role in the Mormon community in a properly concise manner. He describes how she was shouldered with heavier parenting duties upon the church's arrival when Newell was given elite status in the Mormon hierarchy, and thus much of his time was absorbed by church activities. Quoting from the LDS.org article, quote, "In Elizabeth Ann, Newell's wife, we see another pattern. That of the devoted spiritual woman who strengthens her family and associates, performing in her home and ward the same kind of function that her husband was performing for the church as a whole. When she was nearly 22 years old and Newell K. Whitney was 27, they married at Kirtland on 20th October 1822. Now quoting from Elizabeth Ann Whitney, quote, "Ours was strictly a marriage of affection. Our tastes, our feelings were congenial, and we were really a happy couple with bright prospects in store." Back to Quinn. "She bore 11 children during the next 24 years and adopted several homeless children. After her husband's call as bishop over the church in the Ohio area, she found that many of Newell's hours at home with the family were now sacrificed to church assignments." Once again, quoting Elizabeth Ann Whitney, quote, "During all these absences and separations from my husband, I never felt to murmur or complain in the least. Yet I was more than satisfied to have him give all time, talents, and ability into the service of the kingdom of God. And the changes in our circumstances and associations which were consequent upon our embracing the gospel never caused me a moment's sorrow." End quote. Now I'm going to propose a thought exercise. What I'm going to do is read from earlier in the article where it speaks of Newell's incredulous brother, Samuel. For this thought exercise, I'm going to switch out Samuel's name with that of Elizabeth, Newell's wife, just to see what it might look like if Elizabeth didn't agree with Newell's devotion to the prophet. Think about her circumstances. What could Elizabeth do? She didn't have legal right to own property or to vote. She probably wouldn't be getting half of Newell's business if they were to divorce. So let's work with a hypothetical that maybe she was skeptical of the prophet, but locked in a marriage with so many children that she had no other options than to go along with her husband's decisions. So once again, from Quinn's article on LDS.org, with the brother Samuel exchanged for wife Elizabeth. Quote, when Newell demonstrated his devotion by consecrating his prosperous business at Kirtland to the service of the church, Samuel, now we're exchanging that for Elizabeth concluded that her husband had been defrauded. Elizabeth could not comprehend the faith that enabled Newell to forsake his Kirtland properties when the church left in 1838, nor could she be comforted when Newell lost his property to Missouri mobs that same year. When Elizabeth visited her husband in Nauvoo in the 1840s, she saw only the contrast between the poverty of the saints and the magnificence of the temple they sacrificed to build. Elizabeth managed Newell's financial affairs in Kirtland, but she frequently urged Newell to forsake the Mormons. The spouses continued to love and respect each other, but Elizabeth never stopped grieving over Newell's choice, just as Newell mourned Elizabeth's rejection of the restored gospel. End quote. Now, this was a hypothetical. It was actually Newell's brother, Samuel, who was skeptical of this, but we just exchanged out Newell's spouse, Elizabeth. Now, really, who knows where Elizabeth Ann Whitney was in her belief system? Given her actions in all of the writings that she left behind throughout her entire timeline within Mormonism, it seems like one would be at pains to claim that she wasn't a sincere believer and honest in her dealings with her fellow saints. Elizabeth was one of the elite women of Mormonism. Her status as Mother Whitney elevated her among the small group of women in Nauvoo and Utah who would forever be the most well-treated and prominent female members of the society. Elizabeth Ann Whitney ran in circles with Zina Huntington, Eliza Snow, Prescindia Lathrop Huntington, and particularly in Utah, but also in Nauvoo as well, these women were absolutely integral to the survival of the Mormons. One of the primary roles of women in the Relief Society, and we discussed the Relief Society last episode. Go back and listen to that. But one of the primary functions of a Relief Society was the physical and spiritual relief of the saints, thus the name, the Relief Society. When it came to blessing and anointing the sick in order to heal them, a priesthood-holding man would often pop in, provide a priesthood blessing, maybe some anointing oil, and then immediately leave to go about his other business or church obligations. More often than not, the women of the Relief Society were the people sticking around and administering medicine to those with ailments. Women in labor particularly relied upon the women to deliver the children and to provide medicinal and spiritual support during the painful and often deadly ordeal of childbirth. Eliza Snow said as much in the 1884 Women's Exponent in Utah when discussing the priesthood rights and privileges of the Relief Society. And I'm going to take this quote from Carol Cornwall Madsen's article in the Dialogue Journal titled Mormon Women and the Struggle for Definition. You'll find a link to this amazing article in the show notes. Quote, the Relief Society did not consider itself just a ladies' auxiliary. Through it, the women of the church had been given a vehicle by which their voices could be heard, their capabilities utilized, their contributions valued. In the process of organizing the women into the structure of the church, Joseph opened other significant avenues of participation. At the 28th April 1842 meeting, he affirmed their right to use spiritual gifts, which were freely exercised in the early days of the church. The gift of tongues had rested on many of the sisters of the church since its beginning, and others had testified to receiving the power to rebuke evil spirits and to prophesy. At issue at this particular meeting in Nauvoo was the right of women to lay on hands for the purposes of healing. Some were ordained for this purpose. Joseph explained to the Relief Society women, but, he assured them, anybody could do it if they had faith or if the sick had the faith to be healed by that administration. These were gifts of the Spirit, he told them, designated to follow all believers. They were gifts of faith given to the faithful, irrespective of gender or age. One member of the General Retrenchment Association described her own healing at the hands of her young son, whose, quote, perfect and pure faith in the power and mercies of God had claimed for her the blessings which he asked in childish simplicity and trust. Back to Madsen. Again, Eliza Snow was to lead as the practice of blessing one another through laying on of hands and washing and anointing developed among the sisters. Eliza not only encouraged the use of these spiritual activities, but taught women the proper procedure. In a directive to the Relief Society in 1884, she reminded the sisters that no special setting apart was necessary for these administrations. Quoting Eliza Snow, quote, "Any and all sisters," she said, "who honor their holy covenants not only have the right, but should feel it a duty, whenever called upon, to administer to our sisters in these ordinances. And we testify that when administered and received in faith and humility, they are accompanied with almighty power." End quote. After that, Madsen goes on to describe the crucial role the women of the Relief Society played in the childbirth process. Quote, "Minutes of the women's organizations, Relief Society, YWMIA, and Primary, personal diaries, and letters attest to the efficacy of these spiritual activities of the women, not only in healing the sick and bringing comfort and solace to women in childbirth, but in strengthening the spiritual fiber of all who participated in them. Relief Society testimony meetings were punctuated with demonstrations of the gift of tongues and accounts of healings by the administration of sisters. Washing and anointing a woman about to be confined for childbirth became one of the most significant of these rituals, encouraged by their leaders and sought after by the sisters themselves. At a time when women continually faced the crushing burden of infant death as they gave birth year after year, or even their own death, such administrations by those who knew precisely the pangs of that burden had a deep and personal meaning. The women must have experienced a unique transmittal of energizing spiritual strength and support as they felt the knowing and comforting hands of kindred souls placed upon them. These religious practices became a source of spiritual bonding among the sisters of the church." End quote. Relief Society meetings, those testimony meetings. We'll talk about that in a minute, but let's zoom in on the focus of that quote. There's no other way of saying this, but without the women of the Relief Society and the root and witching herb medicine and the maternity care that they provided, the Mormons in Nauvoo and Utah simply never would have survived. If we're using the words mother and caretaker synonymously for our purposes today, the caretaking these women provided for the ailing saints was the only way these people could survive given their circumstances. Another aspect contributing to women being in these caretaker roles in Nauvoo and Utah was simply the structure of society. So let's zoom out a little bit here. Women's inability to legally run a business or own property, with the caveat that they could do those things if their husband was incapacitated. They couldn't sign contracts, they couldn't negotiate wages, and most of these other legal protections that men enjoyed, women couldn't take part in. This legal and social structure inevitably resulted in the number and types of jobs that women could fill being significantly limited. Now, to go back to something that was said earlier in that quote, Eliza Snow recounts these medicinal and herbal remedies being used as her own health was waning in 1886 in a letter that she sent to Zina Diantha Huntington. I think this quote specifically illustrates just how crucial the medical practices of the Relief Society were in order to keep the community of the saints from collapsing from their own sickness. This is from Todd Compton's In Sacred Loneliness, beginning on page 339, quoting Eliza Snow. Quote, "Sister Thomas comes as regularly as the morning, does my marketing and whatever I require. I think it was Tuesday after my arrival, Dr. Pratt called. I described the condition of my lungs, and the next day she came and brought not an apothecary shop, but a variety of medicines, which I took as she directed, and they were truly blessed to my healing. I am now quite comfortable, rest pretty well nights, can now eat not only fresh vegetables, but a moderate quantity of bread, have rode out a few times. Sister Susan brings me a piece of sacrament bread on Sundays, which is a great comfort to me." End quote. Patty Sessions left behind another letter swearing by the curative powers of the oil the women of the Relief Society were administering through these blessing and anointing rituals in order to heal the Mormons in Utah. While nearly on her deathbed, Patty Sessions wrote the following, quote, "The Lord has blessed me and prospered me in all I have done, for which I feel very thankful, hoping he will continue to bless me while I live, both spiritually and temporally, with all that shall be for my good and his glory to give unto me. I am now almost 82 years old, February next, the 4th. I drink no tea, nor coffee, nor spirituous liquors. I don't smoke, nor take snuff, nor any poisonous medicine. I use consecrated oil for my complaints. That she got from the Relief Society. Now I say to you, do as I have done, and as much better as you can, and the Lord will bless you as he has me. Signed, Patty Sessions. End quote. The medicine that the Relief Society provided kept Mormonism alive. Now, to go back to something else that Madsen spoke of earlier, the religious practices, these Relief Society testimony meetings. These were just small gatherings of women in a secluded room, partaking of their sacrament or using anointing oil, and then chanting or speaking in tongues. Of these meetings, Madsen quotes Emmeline B. Wells, describing the joy that she felt when these women would congregate to worship, even speaking of Mother Whitney when doing so. Quote, looking back on a lifetime of sharing such experiences with other women, Emmeline Wells recalled the beautiful little meetings which the sisters often held in her home. She remembered, quote, the glorious testimonies borne by Sister Isabella Horn and Eliza Snow, and the wonderful singing of Mother Elizabeth Ann Whitney, in tongues, with its beautiful interpretation by Aunt Zina. Back to Madsen. These were women, she told a new generation of Mormon sisters, whom I loved as much as if bound by kindred ties, closer, perhaps, because our faith and work were so in tune with our everyday life. Back to Madsen. Access to this kind of spiritual power and union by both men and women gave meaning to the concept of building a community of saints. End quote. Building a community of saints. Once again, the actors get all the credit. The supporting staff, the writers, the stage crew, et al. They're all relegated to the footnotes. Joseph Smith built Nauvoo out of a swampland. Brigham Young built the Utah Basin out of an arid desert wasteland. Too often, the people truly responsible for all of the work which actually goes into these massive ventures gets lost somewhere in the narrative, and eventually these people are lost to history. Now, the truth of the matter is, everybody played their part in building the Mormon theocracies somehow, some way, sometime. Every person, regardless of how small a slice of the work pie they chewed on, each and every one of the saints devoted everything they had to build the Mormon Mecca du jour. By this time, millions of people working endlessly, neglecting their families, turning down that promotion at work because it means that they'd have to work on Sundays or it would interfere with their duties as Relief Society president or bishop, putting off that family vacation until next year because they can't afford to pay tithing and go on holiday. All of these sacrifices. Why? For those ever crucial 6 words. To build a community of saints. Now, these are just the modern sacrifices, but during the religion's infancy, the saints sacrificed their lives. They signed over property, businesses, and all worldly possessions to the kingdom. They didn't have money to feed their families during the winter, yet they still paid money to build a temple used for nothing other than magic ordinances. These people forewent education and career opportunities in order to fulfill both needs with empty promises from clergy who didn't truly have the people's best interest in mind. Sacrifice was a never-ending drain on these people. But the underlying safety net always came down to a constant force for guardianship, hospitality, and caretaking. Moms. But is women's role in society best utilized when it stops at mother and caretaker? Mormon culture has a body of strong opinions concerning women's role in the church. We won't look back to Brother Brigham Young or Heber C. Kimball for social commentary. Let's keep it within the realm of the last half century. I'm going to provide a number of quotes that aren't so much causal of Mormon culture and gender roles. They're indicative as a metric of Mormon culture and gender roles. This is from Spencer W. Kimball in The Teachings of Spencer W. Kimball. Quote, too many mothers work away from home to furnish sweaters and music lessons and trips and fun for their children. Too many women spend their time in socializing, in politicking, in public services when they should be home to teach and train and receive and love their children into security. End quote. This is from the June 1975 Ensign from Faith Precedes the Miracle. Quote, Women, you are to become a career woman in the greatest career on earth, that of homemaker, wife, and mother. It was never intended by the Lord that married women should compete with men in employment. They have a far greater and more important service to render." End quote. Once again from Spencer W. Kimball. This is from 1977, during the San Antonio fireside in December. Quote, "Numerous divorces can be traced directly to the day when the wife left the home and went out into the world into employment. Two incomes raise the standard of living beyond its norm. Two spouses working prevent the complete and proper home life, break into the family prayers, create an independence which is not cooperative, causes distortion, limits the family, and frustrates the children already born." End quote. From Ezra Taft Benson in 1987 in To the Mothers in Zion. Quote, "In the beginning, Adam, not Eve, was instructed to earn the bread by the sweat of his brow. Contrary to conventional wisdom, a mother's calling is in the home, not in the marketplace." End quote. Even more recent, we have Gordon B. Hinckley as prophet in the October 2006 priesthood session of General Conference. Quote, "Young women are exceeding young men in pursuing educational programs. And so, I say to you, young men, rise up and discipline yourself to take advantage of educational opportunities. Do you wish to marry a girl whose education has been far superior to your own?" End quote. Once again from Gordon B. Hinckley, this is in the 2007 April General Conference. Quote, "Husbands, love and treasure your wives. They are your most precious possessions." End quote. Sure, that is taken out of context, but what context justifies calling wives the possessions of their husbands? And in January of 2013, Elaine S. Dalton said, quote, "Young women, you will be the ones who will provide the example of virtuous womanhood and motherhood. You will understand your roles and your responsibilities, and thus will see no need to lobby for rights." End quote. 2 months after this quote made its way into the public lexicon, Ordained Women was organized by Kate Kelly. One thing I think most of us will find agreeable is that Mormonism is a product of its time and the culture by which it is surrounded. Whether that's the early Mormonism we discussed in the show or the more modern iterations, it developed from a worldwide culture where women have historically been less empowered than men to make accomplishments. And that's generally speaking. Now, that's not to say women are somehow less capable of making those accomplishments by design or anything. That's patently absurd. It's merely to point out that it seems only recently have women begun getting many of the rights and privileges most often relegated to men throughout the majority of human history. I mean, think about this in the abstract. This country has been a sovereign nation for more than 300 years, and for less than 1/3 of that, women have been able to vote. New Zealand was the first country to allow women to vote nationwide, and that was in 1893. To put some perspective on it, the last person to be born in the 1800s died last year. One person's lifetime that women first got the right to vote in the entire world. And in many countries today, women still don't hold any political power, closer resembling America 150 years ago in more respects than just suffrage. Now, even further perspective on this, historians have indisputable proof of empires rising and falling from over 4,000 years ago, beginning with the Akkadians. The first governmental system we can really call a democracy was the Athenians around the 5th century BCE. Are we to truly believe that women have had nothing of substance to contribute to the political realm until the most recent 5% of history that democracies have been a viable system of government? And even voting, even this metric is flawed because the right to vote doesn't automatically mean complete gender equality. Now, everything that I've said today is not trying to say anything about the way that things ought to be. This is a history podcast, not social commentary or politics. I'm merely speaking to how things are and have been. But there's a reason why one of my favorite podcasts is My History Can Beat Up Your Politics, because history has an incredible way of putting not just politics, but everything into broader perspective. And when we think about this, we've made a lot of progress towards objective equality worldwide in the past century, whatever objective equality looks like. And if you think that we're done and everybody is truly equal regardless of race, gender identity, sexuality, then the conversation is over, right? We don't need to talk about this anymore. We're done here. Mission accomplished. Perfect equality was achieved during the civil rights movement, and the end of apartheid was just a cherry on top. The ways of our ancestors will continue to endure and will follow what our fathers taught us, just like their fathers before them. Men will continue to be absentee breadwinners and women the full-time homemaker and caregiver. It'll be the perfect 1950s white picket fence home, only without all the racism and sexism this time around. But if you think there are some issues with society which could be solved or even somewhat mitigated by a never-ending pursuit towards greater equality, then we can begin having conversations about what equality should look like. What is the best way to go about achieving our collective goals of greater equality? Where do the most egregious inequalities live in our respective societies? How can we cause social change without leaving any minority behind? What does a truly equal utopia look like? And how do we all work towards achieving such an abstract concept? I guess the crux of the question is, how do we progress? What does progress look like? Well, progress is prospective, and we can only make it by understanding our legacy in retrospect. And most importantly, when it comes to true progress, we can't allow the progress people seek to be mired in the virtues and dictates of our legacy. Many of us were raised with a codified system of morals, complete with promises of eternal happiness or eternal damnation in exchange for obedience to authority and never viewing the system with a critical eye. Leaving religion can be hard, as so many previously answered questions are suddenly cast into the realm of the unknown. Where does morality come from? Why should I be good to my fellow human beings? What happens to us when we die? Our next guest has been trying to help atheists navigate parenting through his colorful and exciting children's book series, Annabelle Aiden. J.R. Becker holds a BA in philosophy and a Juris Doctorate from Emory University School of Law. After becoming a father, J.R. was inspired to found the Annabelle and Aiden series to foster curiosity and scientific awareness in the next generation. The first book, on evolution, was banned by Christian News Network, nice little feather in the cap, inspiring him to create more books on critical thinking, the Big Bang, and now death from a secular humanist perspective. J.R. lives in New Jersey with his wife Leah and 2 children, Annabelle and Aiden. And, of course, listeners of the show may recognize him from episode 88 of this show, and he's back to talk about the 4th book in the Annabelle and Aiden series. J.R., welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I want to talk about this new book because this book is not quite out yet, but because you're coming onto this show and talking to us about it, I was able to get an advanced copy of this, and I am just amazed at the content of this book. Can you tell us a little bit about the Annabelle and Aiden series, as well as what you're covering in this book?
Sure. The Annabelle and Aiden series is a pro-science children's book series that covers big questions for little thinkers, and we try to think of areas in which science crosses lines with philosophy. We stay close to hard science as much as we can, and we try to be pro-science more than anti-anything else, but we definitely inspire critical thinking skills and kind of contrast science, show science in a light by kind of comparing it with superstition and myths and fairy tales often. Our first book was on Darwinian evolution, which was closer to just hard science, while keeping it inspiring and for children to understand. But our second book was on critical thinking. It's called Oh, the Things We Believed. and it kind of goes through the flat Earth and Earth on the back of turtles all the way down, storks delivering babies, kind of really fun. I kind of thought, like, what's better for kids' books than all these fairy tales and myths all in one, to teach children critical thinking. And then our third book is called Worlds Within Us, on the Big Bang and how we're all made of stardust. And then right now we are leading up to our fourth book. It's actually entitled What Happens When We Die. We are towards the end of our Kickstarter campaign for this book, but we could talk about that later. But it's being illustrated right now and should be out in August.
This is an interesting subject to try and tackle when it comes to children. Obviously, there are a number of conversations that parents have to have with kids in order to help them mature on what we would consider a healthy maturation kind of timeline for children to follow. And death is definitely one of those subjects that it sometimes is spurred by, well, we won't be seeing grandma anymore, or it turns out that Fluffy ran out into traffic and we need to have a serious talk that we won't ever be seeing Fluffy again. So I really appreciate that you're trying to come at this from almost a proactive perspective, just as much as it could be used reactively when a tragedy does happen to strike in a child's world. How do we go about discussing death with children in a way that can kind of facilitate questions and thinking more than it can be going straight for giving them what we consider unequivocal answers, as religion so often provides?
Right. So, I think one thing that you've probably heard a lot, or maybe even said a lot, is some of the most important words in the English language are the three words, I don't know. And that's something that, atheism and skepticism embraces. We embrace not knowing everything. We don't know everything. And it's really important to say that. And then my books kind of focus on what we do know and what is positive and inspiring about it. We could tell children that the second law of thermodynamics states that when you die, your energy never ever dies, because it's a fact. Energy is never created or destroyed. So your energy will always be in the world. And, we remember people by the memories they leave behind. And I was really inspired by a video narrated by Stephen Fry. And he talks about how if we were immortal and lived forever, life would be far less meaningful, because anything we wouldn't want to accomplish anything. If there's always tomorrow, why even get out of bed today? And that really kind of lit a spark in me. I really realized the thing that makes things special is that they end. Stephen Fry uses the example of, like, the only reason why you enjoy a piece of cake or a meal or a nap or a great day out with your family at the park is knowing it's not going to be forever. You're appreciating it in the moment. If it went on forever and ever, you'd get sick of it. It would lose its taste and you wouldn't be able to relish it. And life, we're so lucky that we're here for the limited amount of time that we're here. And I almost think death makes life so much more meaningful and worth celebrating.
I'm reminded, just speaking on that a little bit of, I'm going to butcher this, but this was a Ricky Gervais quote, something along the lines of, religious people may ask what we have to live for if we don't believe in God. Well, it turns out that atheists have nothing to die for. When we look at it this way of just seeing life and appreciating it, as opposed to the infinite sweetness of, never-ending licking of a cake that awaits us in the eternities ahead, as opposed to appreciating more of the life that we have here, we have nothing but life to live for. We don't have anything to die for. And I feel like in my own mind, that causes me to appreciate life to such a greater extent that I feel like I never appreciated when I did believe that there was somewhere that I was heading after this. It's a matter of, we hinge on this small pinnacle of time, and our decisions here impact what happens in eternity. But now the way that I tend to view the world is, my decisions impact me here every single day. I don't have to wait for eternity to feel the consequences of my decisions. And that causes me to think about decisions in a much more time-sensitive manner and try to make decisions that have the best consequences in the long and short-term ramifications. So I wonder if you could speak at all to that. How exactly do we try and communicate to children, especially if they have been indoctrinated into a system where they believe there is an eternity? Let's say parents have children who are, anywhere from 4 to, 9 years old, the age range that these books are aimed towards. If they are coming out of a religion and they're, bringing their children with them, how do they kind of broach that subject that, hey, we've been telling you all along that there's, going to be eternal cake in the afterlife. Mm-hmm. Now that's not something that we believe in. How do we navigate that, JR?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. The only, I would love to hear other people's answers. The best answer I could think of is just to, I wouldn't bring it up. I don't think it's productive to just go up to them and say, by the way, that was all a lie, full stop. That's not productive. But I think if, at the next time they start asking questions or anything like that, I think it is important to say, we don't yet have much reason to think that any of that stuff is true. It might be, but we don't have evidence for it yet. But in the meantime, here's what we do know. And then, go through all the positive things that I said before. And that's what my book does. And how, how it inspires us to live life now, and how your energy never dies, and how we need to appreciate our time here and make the best of it. And that's it. And I think as people grow up, they understand better. I was speaking to a friend this week, and she said she had her kid, she drove by a cemetery and she didn't know what to say, but she told her kid, like, yeah, people are buried here. And, that helped it kind of hit home with the kid, and he kind of understood better. So that could be another way of doing it.
And it doesn't seem like just, a shock and awe type of system, approaching a kid and saying, hey, we used to believe in something, now we don't believe in it, or, all in one brunt doesn't seem like the right way to approach this. But small incremental conversations, right, multiple times, and leading them up to, let's say, like the death of a grandparent or of a family pet or something. Hopefully all of these micro conversations that have happened, and driving past cemeteries and asking what are all of those stones sticking out of the ground for? Hopefully all of those conversations lead up to the child accepting more easily that they will not be seeing grandma at Christmas next year. Yeah. Yeah. And, it's important to, sandwich it with positives, oh, how lucky that they got to live, tell the kid Agreed. how rare it is, how lucky someone had to be for everything to come together for them to live, and how much you enjoyed being with them, and how you're going to honor their memory and what you learned from them, and how they metaphorically live on through what they taught you. And, there's a lot to say. So we have to say that, I think it's focus on the positive, and after a while, the lore and appeal of superstition kind of fades away because they have something better. One thing that strikes me about this subject in particular is we have a deep vested interest in living as long as we can. That's a deep survival instinct that, the vast majority of humans share. And we don't know anything other than life because we're lucky enough to be living our current life. But there is this overarching fear of what is it like to not be living anymore, to not be conscious, because we've always known what that consciousness is. And I'm reminded of a Mark Twain quote where he says, I do not fear death. I'd been dead for billions and billions of years before I was born, mm-hmm. and had not suffered the slightest inconvenience from it. Well, that is, more of a kind of a pragmatic, and some might even see it as a pessimistic approach. I think there is a divine truth held in that, if I can ascribe divinity to a Mark Twain quote, in that we didn't know what life was like before we were born. There's no evidence to suggest that we might know what life will be like after we die. It's just we are here right now. We should learn to appreciate what we are experiencing right now as much as we possibly can.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great quote.
So, JR, earlier you made reference to a Kickstarter campaign. Walk us through this. What is going to happen with this book, and where does it sit?
So we are, I think it ends in about a week or maybe even a few days. So it's kind of everyone's last chance to get a pre-order on it. If you go to Kickstarter.com and you search for, if you just type in the words, "What happens when we die?" it should come up. And people could also check out our new website at AnnabelleAiden.com, spelled in the most common way, ANNABELLE, and Aiden. Aiden is AIDEN. So AnnabelleAiden.com, and then kind of a link to the Kickstarter pops up there as well. And it's been a great success. People have been waiting for this book for a while. They've enjoyed our last book. So, our Kickstarter kind of soared at the beginning and then kind of flattened out, but now we're doing well and, hoping for a strong finish. And people are excited about it.
Fantastic. And I have to say, my my little nephew did get a copy of the Evolution book, and he's just getting at the age where he's actually recognizing what words are. And I look forward to when he's actually able to comprehend kind of the concepts that are presented in it. And I've just pledged to support this Kickstarter in order to get a pre-order copy as well, because I think this is another book that he really needs to have as well, just for that inevitable time when you have to have that conversation. Maybe this book will help make that conversation about grandma or grandpa a little bit easier in Little Hunter's future. So for myself personally, JR, I really want to thank you for the work that you have provided. I look forward to actually seeing this book and holding it in my hands when it does come out. I believe you said sometime in August. Is that about right?
Yes. I mean, the Kickstarter... Yes, it should be in August. Hopefully, I like to underpromise and overdeliver, so hopefully, likely before that, likely in July, but we will see.
Fantastic. So, JR, thank you so much for coming on, and I look forward to reading the book.
Thank you. Thanks for all your support and help and for having me on.
And now, for your listening pleasure, with permission from the author, here is a sneak peek at Annabelle and Aiden. What happens when we die? Annabelle and Aiden peek outside, through their small window. Through the trees, they see a bird flying far too low. The wind blows hard behind its wings. It's going way too fast. It tries to fly over the house, but bangs into the glass. They run outside to find the bird. They see its crooked bill, its eyes closed, its belly up, its body silent, still. Oh my gosh, what should we do? Do you think that it's dead? Let's find our friends to help us out, young Aiden quickly said. All the friends were gathered and stood around that bird. Even Tom was deep in thought, and not a sound was heard. Annabelle asked, "What happens when we have to say goodbye? What happens when we leave this life? What happens when we die?" To find out what happens, be sure to check the show notes to find the fundraiser campaign for J.R. Becker and Annabelle and Aiden, and pre-order your book now. It might make a great Christmas gift this year. We have a couple of new patrons to thank who pledged to support the show at patreon.com/nakedmormonism. First, we have a pledge edit by Christy Ann, a pledge by George Green, hopping back on the bandwagon. Thank you, George. And a pledge by Adam Carter as well. Thank you to all of you who pledged to support the show at patreon.com/nakedmormonism. This is a listener-funded venture, and any support is much appreciated and does allow the research and the time and effort that goes into producing and creating this podcast. And it also employs our fantastic audio engineer, Brian Ziegenhagen. With that, I wanted to make a quick announcement. Every month for the patrons, we do what is known as our NAMO Home Evening. Of course, this is a play off of the Mormon Family Home Evening, where every Monday night, they have basically family scripture study or lessons or whatever the case may be. It's family time on Monday. So the first Monday of every month, we do a hangout, a Google Hangout with featured guests. Our hangout for May of 2018 was with Aaron of the We Talk About Dead People podcast, a really fantastic history podcast, and we just aired it on YouTube. So this is the first time doing a hangout on air, so you can find that on YouTube, but in order to get it into your audio feed, You have to be supporting the show at patreon.com/nakedmormonism for as little as $1 per episode. All the support is deeply appreciated and allows us the opportunities to do all of these things and collaborate with other amazing podcasters. So if you enjoy history and kind of an abstract take on history, I think you'll really enjoy the conversation we had with Aaron, as well as all of the people who joined, whether it was on the Hangout or in the comments section. So be looking forward to checking that out. And for all of the subsequent Name a Home evenings that we will be airing on Google Hangouts on air, when they do happen, and that is the first Monday of every month. So once again, thanks to all of those who did join us, and thanks to Aaron of We Talk About Dead People for providing such a wonderful wealth of information and knowledge and bringing to the table quite a bit of fun little snippets about Trotsky, about Mao Zedong, and a number of other prominent historical figures. It was a really fun conversation. I would really recommend checking out this Name a Home evening. With that, a couple of other announcements. I am on the most recent Scathing Atheist, where we did a Bible Peace Theater. It was quite fun. I would really recommend checking out that Scathing Atheist. You should be able to find a link to it in the show notes. And next week, it appears on the 15th. If you are a subscriber to the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel, you'll be able to see the audio and video of a conversation that I had with Seth Andrews. He was nice enough to provide his platform and a fair amount of his time to talk a bit about Brigham Young. And it was a really fun conversation. So be looking forward to that on next Tuesday. Of course, I will announce in next week's episode when it airs and let everybody know and provide a link for that episode in the show notes. That episode, of course, of The Thinking Atheist. With all of that said, thank you everybody so much for supporting, and whether that support comes in the form of feedback at nakedmormonism@gmail.com, whether that support is following us along Facebook and Twitter, whatever that support looks like, or for the most noble of you, financial support. It is dearly and deeply appreciated. And most importantly, all of those of you who hit the download button every week, thank you so much for listening. I hope to talk to you next time here on the Naked Mormonism Podcast. This podcast is produced with the help of Julie Briscoe as social media manager, Natalie Newell as production assistant, Brian Ziegenhagen as audio engineer, and Andrew Torres of the law offices of P. Andrew Torres as legal counsel. Music is provided by Jason Camo of aloststateofmind.com and used with permission. Naked Mormonism is a production of Ground Gnomes LLC, copyright 2018, all rights reserved.